Welcome to this week's edition of Frivolous Gravitas, where we will be talking about something which I luckily know absolutely nothing about or have very limited knowledge, but I'll try. So I'm in the same bed as you, probably, who are listening, because this is a new technology that Kris is going to be taking us through. That is the technology of a neural network, which sounds a lot like, brain, but I think it's a lot different than that. So why don't we just start by, Kris, why don't you just take us off and tell us what a neural network actually is?
For sure. So hello and welcome everyone, Frivolous Gravitas. I'm Kris Driver, and this is Jordan Roy, my co-host extraordinaire. So we often hear about anthropomorphic terms to describe generalized compute functions like neural nets, but I think it's important that we get a rudimentary understanding of what we're referring to generally when we talk about machine learning, artificial intelligence, and deep neural networks and all that kind of stuff. So the reason why I think it's important is because we haven't really yet developed sound regulations relating to its applications, and it's already so ubiquitous in technology that it's being pre-installed in our vehicles, games, and appliances, and even applied in government now. So it's kind of important because the potential harms which may arise by misuse and misunderstanding, they can bear very severe life-altering consequences for all members of society based on how they're applied and where they're applied. So before we get into those issues, and to help just avoid the worst outcomes, I think we should first try to understand what exactly machine learning, artificial intelligence systems are doing and how they work from the inside out. So to do that, we'll just cover some really basic examples. So I'm not going to get like heavy into math or anything, so you don't have to worry about that. But
maybe we can do like a side episode, episode 16.5, where you just kind of show your math or show us a bunch of pretty graphs.
Yeah, I'll probably get into that when we do an episode on my research project and stuff, because that's all machine learning, neural nets and stuff. But it's kind of it's hard to discuss it when we don't have a baseline of terms and concepts. So I'm just going to give the very briefest overview of conceptually how they work, just to take the magic out of the system. So essentially, a neural net relates to a graph structure in data science. And it's akin to playing like all possible combinations of a game like tic-tac-toe, to which we then referred to a computer as having learned how to best play the next move. So that's where we get the artificial part of AI. It's not real intelligence. It's just a bunch of math equations and probabilities and statistics, and it's giving you the best solution based on its training set, not based on any cogitation or thought.
Right. So now I've got a bit of computer, basic computer knowledge. So it's the difference between this and something that we would just consider a regular program would be.
I'll get into that. You guys got to let me
explain
what it is first.
Yeah, sorry.
So in the game of tic-tac-toe, we'd play on a 3x3 grid where each space of the grid can only contain one of two possible values, either an X or a 0 based on or an O based on whose turn it is. So you can imagine then that if given enough time, one could easily write a program that tested every possible combination of all possible moves on a 3x3 grid, and then calculate some probabilities for each of the possible choice moves based on having played every single game possible. The math would look something like this. It would be like the first player moves, they have 9 available options on the grid, because there's 9 spaces in a 3x3 grid. The second player move only has 8 available options, and all the options are the same as the first player except the one move that the first player actually chose to make. The third move would then award the player with 7 remaining options because 2 boxes are checked, etc., etc. So basically, in the math, it would look a lot like geometry, in the sense that when you think of a point, you consider it not to have any dimension, like it has no depth, width, or height. So in truth, if we were to draw a point accurately, we'd not be able to see it on a grid or map it, because there would be no face for the light to hit for us to see it. So technically, even a point on a Euclidean geometric space or on a graph or something isn't really there. So one point has no dimension, and that's kind of crucial just for this one point that I wanted to get to, no pun intended. So if we were to draw it accurately, we wouldn't be able to see it because it has no thickness and no face. And it's just an infinitesimal point. For the sake of readability and utility, though, we'll usually mark the point as a dot, just so we know where it is. But it's not actually that it's physically in that spot, right? And the reason why that's important is because when it relates to the math and the geometry, what we're doing is expanding dimensions of possibilities. And that sounds really convoluted and complicated, but what we mean in math by dimensions, it's just that we're extracting out more range of motion from the original point. So for instance, if you wanted to expand a dot across a spatial dimension, you'd need 2 points to make a line. And essentially, we'd have like a one-dimensional line from those 2 points. And it may only have length with no depth or height, or only height with no width or depth. But the point is we'd have added a dimension to it by adding in infinitely many small points in between point A and point B. So if we add a dimension to a line, we can then describe the area in the integration of all the infinitely many lines. So if our line had only width and no height or depth, we could then make a rectangle from any line by adding a height or depth and multiplying the length by another length. So this is what we refer to as an area having two-dimensional shape, because you're taking that line and you're integrating it over all the infinite many ranges in between the height that we've added. So you see how we get from a point to a line by stretching out millions and millions of little points?
And then
when we have 2 points in a line and we turn them like this, we can stretch them out like this over width to get a two-dimensional space.
Right.
So in the premise of neural networks, we expand a whole set of options, like the 8 possible moves remaining after the first player places the first X, as if we're expanding a dimension of games out from the first move. That's sort of how it relates.
Right.
So
now, okay, yeah, sorry. Well, because after a while, if you have 8 possible moves, tic-tac-toe is nice and simple. But if you have 8 possible moves, after a while, the numbers are going to get a little higher for the possibilities of the next move.
Yeah, they grow exponentially.
Yes, this is what I'm trying to say. No non-math brain. So, and then, but as they grow exponentially, you can't just have it look through and play every single move over, one by one to see which one has the highest probability, because that would take forever. You would need infinite processing speed, and you would need a library that would take it would be almost prohibitively large. So you need a shortcut.
And that's what the data scientist does, is it the engineer of the neural network is looking to optimize it so that you can get the optimal result without having to do all the computation.
Mm-hmm.
So otherwise we'd just have one algorithm and we just plug everything into it and everything would work fine. The reason that doesn't work is, like you said, every time you have one new option and another option after that, it exponentially makes the compute processing required to calculate it just endless, essentially. But the thing is, we go about that in a very particular way. But I want to get that after we first define like what the basic neural network is, before we start delving into like optimization problems and things like that. Because that's where all the math comes in, is like Hilbert spaces and Markov spaces and gauge theory and all that junk.
Okay, we're going to be doing a lot of defining today.
So we can simply, theoretically, on a simple system like with tic-tac-toe, we can multiply available options with remaining available options. So it's like 9 times 8 times 7 times whatever. Most of the games will end sooner than that, but knowing what the maximum length is useful for an engineer, since the problem demand is exponentially heavier compute load, as you said, as the data sets and possibilities are expanded. So for tic-tac-toe, I had to look it up just because I tried to do the math and it was wrong. There are precisely 255,168 possible games to play. So it's not exactly 9 factorial, but if you did like 9 times 8 times 7, which is 9 factorial, it comes something like 380,000 or something like that. It's a huge number for people to calculate, but for computers it's really easy because you can process 1 gigahertz is 1 million cycles a second. Yeah.
Right, but
It
if
might
you're
take
playing
7
something
clock
like
cycles to do a calculation, but
if you're playing something like chess or checkers or even a card game, it's beyond. Was someone said that there's more combinations to a solitaire setup than there are like atoms in the universe or something stupid like that.
yeah, I'm not sure I believe that, but
well, it's because you have a 52 deck card, and so no, the odds of like getting the same playing the same game of cards
that might be true.
Yeah, because just you have 52 cards, and the way they're set up, and then the way you play it, you just infinitely, it just expands and expands exponentially, like you said.
Yeah. So I think the number of atoms in the universe is somewhere in the order of like 10 to the power of 82 is the last number I heard.
Yeah, something that we literally can't imagine.
Yeah, literally. So how do we encourage the system to know what's a favorable solution is? Well, the question is answered pretty much just by a cost function. We write a function that leads a computer to the types of results that we're looking for. And one way of going about doing this is to have a cost function. Another is to provide a reward function, which is kind of the same thing, but with a negative sign instead of a positive sign. Either or works sort of the same similarly, but the optimization functions work differently on them because of negative numbers, and the way you multiply negative numbers creates negatives, and then it just throws everything into imbalance. So usually they stick to positive numbers, and then they try to minimize using gradient descent. I'm not sure are you familiar with gradient descent or?
I'm not familiar with cost functions.
No. I'm gonna finish the cost.
Okay.
I'll go over the cost functions, but do you think we should get into no, that's too mathy probably. Let's get that for next time.
We can do the math another time, but let's just simplify it.
Okay, well, simply put, our tic-tac-toe example would write a cost function then that awarded points based on success of a game. So pretty much just any score, and then the objective of the neural net would be to maximize its score. So maybe you'd think of giving it a higher score if it wins sooner, just to help it try and win right away.
Okay,
not throw away hands and things like that.
Or it goes through the possibilities and will give them more time if they have a certain result, because some of them are all just going to be like these types of results, or everything down this path, I guess, would be a loss. Everything down this path would be a tie or a stalemate. Everything down this
like branching trees.
Yeah, that's what I'm thinking, because you have you have all these possibilities, and if I put an X here, I can still win. But after a certain time, putting an X in another box would result in a loss every single time. So you just everything down that branch is no. We don't have to.
And it'll go through every possible dumb combination imagine.
Right.
Even if it has a winning chance, it'll still pick the dumb one for 100,000 times until it finds that one winning.
Right.
So it's really dumb. But it's just through brute force that you can do it over and over and over again. Once it finally gets the aha and it gets a score from it, it scrubs everything else clean, and then it keeps working with that one.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not doing that based on like volition or a want or a need or anything like that. It's strictly like, is this number greater than this number or lesser than this number? Then do this. So it's just strictly math. There's no cogitation whatsoever implied by it. So you can then graph the cost function of the results that you get from all the training data, from all the attempts that you've made at the game, and focus on just the most successful ones. The simplest cost function is just taking the sum of squares. So if you've got a cost function and you're trying to minimize it, right? So squaring anything makes it exponentially larger. So when you're trying to find a local minimum, that's the whole gradient descent thing, but that's technical detail. Basically, all you're saying is one number bigger than the other number? Yes. Then that's a higher cost, so less reward. Do the other thing more. That's essentially all it's doing.
So are you saying cost function or cost function?
Cost.
Okay, so my brain went somewhere. I went into trigonometry in my brain because I thought you said cost.
Trig in there.
So
sine waves and cosine waves are really useful because they keep everything within a one boundary on a unit circle. So they are used a lot.
Right. Okay.
But yeah, so trying everything to evaluate success and failure based on a cost reward function sort of prescribed by a human has its own pitfalls. And importantly, that's the methodology of training in neural nets and interpreting its results that we find the perils of artificial intelligence. It's not in the algorithm we have to fear, it's the application of the algorithms or our faith in the outputs or our readings of their efficacy. If we assume an ML algorithm trained is perfect and assumes the engineer and the algorithm has discovered a perfect truth in nature, so to speak. So it's needless to say that's quite rare to like discover E equals MC squared because of a neural net.
Well, it's like only reading one book your entire life because it's the way and the truth.
Yeah, no. It's more like nature in that it's all probabilities, like Heisenberg's uncertainty principle dealing with subatomic matter and virtual particles and stuff like that. So we're looking to develop systems that provide useful information and useful functions after having learned from our training data. But you should never really rely on a computer operating on guesses and probabilities from a lab environment or closed simulation of hypotheticals. So it's never going to be the one-stop shop, let's replace humanity with it, because we have moral fiber and spiritual beliefs and core values and things like that you can't. Yeah. You could try to program them in, but the computer is going to find all the dumbest ways of applying that.
Right. And part of it's like we can get computers to write our books for us in one style or another. It's like, you're all morons. Part of writing a book is the actual writing of the book.
Yeah. It's wabi-sabi, the beauty and the imperfection.
Yeah. And it's like, we can write a Mozart symphony. It's like, no. Well, why? Obviously you can do it. You do it because you can. And that's part of the, I can see the approach in that, because even the writer, but also part of being human is like, let me see if I can do it.
Yeah.
But that doesn't mean I have to use it.
But it also doesn't mean that the music isn't beautiful.
Right.
Computers do make beautiful music based on Bach and Beethoven and stuff.
I think Harari kind of fell into that trap quite a lot, because he kind of kept going into like, what are humans going to do once computers are doing everything? It's like, isn't it obvious?
Yeah.
Whatever we want.
We're just going to have sex and eat a lot.
Probably write books and write symphony, art. Find meaning some other way. Enjoy our family instead of having to be at work 24/7.
Yeah. Oh no, what would we do if we had to spend time with family?
No, we'd have to work on relationships instead of working to put caps on toothpaste bottles. It's like, that sounds a lot more fulfilling and rewarding.
Yeah, exactly.
Like working on our interpersonal relationships.
And spending your whole life not paying somebody else. You know what I mean? Or not having rents and interest and dues and taxes. Like, how terrible would that be?
So yeah, it's I'm sorry, Harari, it doesn't sound like the your dystopian nightmare that you think it is.
Well, I think he's the other way. He's a humanist. He thinks that humanity is going to be, we're going to find our true nature once machines take over all the work.
He is a humanist, but at the same time, he spent an entire chapter to not debunking, but problematizing, I guess. I hate that word. Humanism in the light of this. It's like, well, if humans don't matter anymore, then what does? It's like, well, in the human context, humanism still works. In the universal context or the objective context, it doesn't really matter, but we already knew that, so who cares?
Yeah. But I don't see anybody who's working at a grain mill, lamenting the fact that they have tractors to do their entire fields for them. Nowhere in the world is people saying, "Oh, machines took my job."
Yeah, machines took my job. Okay, yeah, here's a field. Here's a hand scythe. Go get
Yeah.
me that grain.
Yeah, let's burn all the cars. Let's get our horses back.
After the
Stable
first
maids
cut,
have no jobs.
like handful by handful cut into the back, it's like you look at your like 400 hectares and you're just like, oh boy.
Yeah, exactly. You'd never finish. Never
No, it would
mind
rot before you
planting
got
and
there.
tilling and, rotating crops. Like, it would be a nightmare.
Yeah. But oh well. So
Yes. So the crucial point is the computer isn't thinking or guessing. It's just performing matrix math, dot products, and tensor calculus. Like, it's integrating derivatives and standard deviations, and it's applying stochastics, and it's just choosing functions over cost functions and repeating it over and over again.
okay.
Um,
Oh yeah, go on. Sorry.
I was just going to say then computing probabilities and matching the right answers like that humans prepare, it's not the same thing as thinking of something or having a feeling. And I just really want to point out that people that are afraid of machine learning, the only way that like artificial intelligence is going to take over anything is if people just leave it in control and just walk away from their duty. Like,
Yeah, and
that's not likely to happen because people like power. So.
well, people like their doomsday scenarios, and like the Cylons made absolutely no sense in Battlestar. I'm sorry, guys, but why did they attack the humans? Well, because they there was no legitimate reason. You didn't run it through. The only thing that was fun about that show was the good guys, but the like, why would, even if we left a computer alone, like it's probably got more chance, if we ever have a thinking computer, it's not going to look at humans and go, God, they're disgusting. Because like, unless we program it like that,
not necessarily, because if you give it an objective that isn't specific or clear enough, it can do that. Like the famous example is the paperclip one, where if you made a computer and it said, just make paperclips perfectly efficient all the time, that's your only job. We don't want people working making paper clips. And then the thing starts like melting down people's houses to build paper clips out of it and destroys the planet because people are getting in the way of it making paper clips. Like, there is that risk, but you'd have to put the thing in control of nuclear weapons and then tell it to make paper clips. Like, how stupid would that be? You know what I mean? Yeah. Like, it's not just going to take over extraneous situations and other environments because it's not capable of processing that math.
Yeah.
Because it can't be that broad. You have to optimize for a specific focus and task.
I think I tried to get into this in our last session when we tried. We tried. It was thanks, Zoom. But one of the reasons that everyone's so afraid is, well, one, science fiction, as far as Asimov tried to allay people's fears. But
he did do a really good job with that, though.
I know, but he was such a good writer. It's an issue of optics, and even from the very, very beginning, even in the Bletchley Park days with Turing, when he's making all these computers that could do this and that, and he's people come up to him and it's like, can you make a computer that can think? And he's like, theoretically, yeah, I guess. And then they start throwing money at him because he's this like genius, intelligent computer designer, and he's not going to say no. So they put him in charge of like the artificial intelligence lab at whatever. And he just starts taking their money to do computer research, and everyone thinks, oh, what's he going to do? And reporters and magazines come around and ask him about like, well, what would happen if computers could think? And he almost like fancied them. It's like, here's the future can be so bright. And him and a lot of the other computer pioneers at the time, someone like Vannevar Bush, didn't really take it seriously, but it was still something that was kind of worth working towards. And we didn't really know anything about AI or have any hint of where to go with it. We thought for the first like 40 years that more processing power, at some point you're just going to get it's just going to like start blinking and go, oh wow, I'm here now. What do I do? Well, I guess we should probably start killing humans. But
And that's one of those things where it comes down to definition of terms, because the Turing machine itself is a very specific machine. So
yes,
it
extremely
wasn't,
specific.
yeah, it wasn't like a stream of consciousness or something. It was just a machine that could convince a human or do things that humans or do things better that humans normally do better than other machines. So, like a
Mhm.
calculator, nobody thinks a calculator is sentient because just calculates, and it does it better than humans. So it's kind of a Turing machine, but it's really not because humans are never good at calculating.
Right, because that's not how our brain works. Now, we
Yeah,
knew, like in the, I don't know if it was the 80s or 90s, eventually we figured out that if you keep piling on memory and processing power, a computer, because they kept saying like this computer is almost as intelligent as, a fly, or we can soon get one that's almost as intelligent as a dog or a rat. And it's just like, that's an oversimplification to almost a criminal degree, because that's not how our consciousness works. It's, we have hints, but the idea that if you just kind of keep piling on power onto it, it's not going to work, because they were calculating, well, human mind has this much memory. It's like, I have no idea how you got that, but whatever. So like they started calculating, like one idea is this many bits, so if you can have this many ideas, that means you have this much processing power generally, and then they averaged it out, and it's like, you guys paid for this. But then at the same time, we don't really understand, as I guess Harari's books definitely show, is like we don't understand what consciousness, mind, and body are. We have a we got a good sense, and I think we're on a better track than we were. But
the two best people to talk or to listen to about that kind of stuff is John Searle and Kevin Mitnick. Kevin Mitnick is like world famous hacker from back in the day. They did a couple movies on him, but he's super philosophical, and he was involved in a lot of like open source projects and things. And John Searle is like one of my favorite philosophy buffs, and he had the Chinese room problem,
we,
where he sort of took a Turing machine to the next level and said, well, if you had a computer that understood Chinese and you don't speak Chinese, then it can convince you that it speaks Chinese even if it doesn't. You know what
right,
I mean? Because it's got perfect recollection. Humans don't. So there are a
right,
lot of ways that you can feign intelligence and look intelligent just by having a huge data store and lots of compute power. And you don't even need to use it all at once. It just needs to all be accessible at the same time for whatever problem you give it. But
mm,
it's still beholden to the algorithm that was built, the objectives that were set, and the filtering functions or the stencils that they put over all the matrix multiplications that they do to optimize it. Because, like you said, we can't do absolutely all values. But what you want to do is get the ones that are most important. So if you think of like a game where a computer is learning to play an Atari game like Breakout, where you have the block on the bottom of the screen and it breaks all the little bricks on the top,
I love that one.
the machine learning algorithm just needs to learn left and right and position of the dot. And as long as it doesn't lose, that dot's going to eventually hit all the bricks, right? So the objective's really simple, just don't lose in that game. And Atari
Mhm.
games are great because you can use the scores as the cost function.
Right, and anything beyond that would just be sugar. So it's like, don't just lose but win, but that
Yeah.
would still be reliant on the initial.
Yeah, but then it can
Now,
fall in traps when you play a game like Mario. I don't know if you remember Mario 1, but sometimes you can um when one of the, what do they call them? The Koopas? The
the
shell guy.
Goombas. Oh yeah,
Goomba,
that was the Koopas.
Koopa, yeah.
Yeah.
If you jump on them on a set of stairs, it'll bounce off the stair and you'll keep landing on top of it and you'll keep getting this points rack up, and you can get like 99 extra lives or whatever by doing it. But you'll never
Right.
finish the level. You'll just sit there getting points. So that's what happens when they fall into this valley where it's not it's not the minimum of the cost function, but it's a minimum because you get so many points and it gets stuck there and it can't come out. So those
Right.
types of steps that you take to find local optimum or local minimums using gradient descent, those types of steps are engineered by the person developing the algorithm. And that's
So
where it's always going to be a pitfall. So even if you had a machine learning take over or an AI take over the world, all you'd have to do is look for one little minimum like that and it would get stuck in a loop. And there would be one in every single application.
Right, because it seems like everything we've been making ends up being extremely specialized. As humans, we tend towards being generalist machines. Essentially, we can specialize ourselves, but our programming lends itself to like, what do I need to do now? Okay, I need to adapt. I need to be a bit creative, and so this allows us to generalize. But from the very beginning, like, we hear the word we hear the word supercomputer, and we have said, it's like a computer, but it's faster. No, supercomputers are usually extremely specialized for the task that they're given. And even Turing's machines that he was building for code decryption, they were built with the program of code decryption embedded in the hardware. There, like, the software computers and the would come later. And then even after that, a general purpose machine, as someone like Ted Nelson might have said, you could make it do anything, but then once you had it doing that, it became more and more specialized. Whereas something where our brains work, you can say, okay, I've now encoded a bunch of values in my head: fire, table, chair, this and that. But now I can recode it, and we can become more or less adaptive. But it's I think when we say something like artificial intelligence, what we assume is that we're going to get adaptive intelligence that can alter its program in such a way that it can say, you can teach it to catch a ball, and it catches a ball, and it's like, okay, I got this. But then you throw a brick at it, and it doesn't catch it very well. But then, it says, okay, what's coming at me? That's not a ball. Well, okay, so I need to put the glove that the humans gave me forward a bit so I can absorb the impact because it's heavier. And then you can get better and better and better at that because it's adapting to the situation. Or if you drive a car into it, well, what's it going to do? It doesn't know to get out of the way. It's good at catching things. It's specialized. But you can program something to be like heavy. No. I thought I'm losing my connection here.
You are?
Dang it. Did you miss anything?
Yeah.
How much?
From the car, catching the car.
Okay, so yeah, you're not catching a car, but it has to realize that it's different. So and I think this is kind of what we were going to get to, I don't know, is how we end up conceptualizing stuff.
Yeah, right before that, I was just going to go over the first thing you asked me was the neural network and the brain thing. I'm just going to make that quick connection first.
Okay, let's go there.
And a brief misnomer, though, too. The system doesn't reprogram itself. It's always the same algorithm. It just follows a different trajectory. And that's sort of the reason why we call them neural networks, is because the way our neurons connect to each other is not through single digits. It's through paths through a tree. So when we were talking about branching off, if you put the X in the middle, how you have probably more likelihoods of winning because there are more ways that X can cross over to a win than putting it, say, in the top left corner when you start. So the branch for the center would be stronger than the branch to start on the left corner in that instance, because all it would have to do is find probabilities of all games it's ever played and say, how many times did I win by putting it in the top left, and how many times did I win by putting it in the center? Right? Or in other words, you can say, as a cost function, you could say, how many times did I not lose? That would probably be a better one for tic-tac-toe, because there is a perfect game you can play to never lose, but not necessarily always win.
Right.
So that's one of those instances where you choose reward over cost differently.
It seems like learning, but it's tallying experience, which is kind of what we do anyways.
It's kind of what we do, yeah. It's what we do isn't binary. What we do has biochemistry involved, and it's got qualia. There's qualitative assessment, and when we build on our past experiences, we are so forgetful that we don't pick and choose the right experiences to build on. That's why we have trauma, right?
Mhm.
Somebody experiences something really harsh, it affects them in other ways for the rest of their lives. That's why childhood trauma is such a big deal in psychology and stuff right now. But the unique thing to the way human brains work that is similar to how neural networks work, but not how any other computer systems work, is that it's doing all this brute force math, making those connections and reinforcing them by changing weights and biases based on the training data. So, in that sense, it's learning in the same way your brain does. Because when we go to sleep and we have dreams, or if you've been playing hockey like 5 hours in one day, you'll go home and like start eating, and all you can think about is like the way you turned this one time today,
Yeah.
stuff like that.
Well,
And you can map that just through neural connections and stuff with mice. You can put them in a maze, and when they're sleeping, you can actually trace which part of the maze they're remembering while they're sleeping because their brain activity.
so my thought is, it kind of jumps to a bigger scope on that, because we have, we're hold on, just making sure my computer's still going. We are programmed as individuals, kind of. It's a crude term for it, but we're also kind of programmed as a species, in a certain way, and
Very much so.
so it kind of sounds more like evolution than programming. So, if I go up in the tree, I don't get eaten, and eventually that becomes a internal reaction. So, we get chased, danger coming, up tree, that kind of danger, and it's slowly, as the race gets more and more experience, it seems to become more and more encoded into what we and how we act, into the algorithm of humanity, because of how we the experience of our environment, and this, through trial and error, which very tragic trial and error. It's like, oh
Mhm.
no, we got eaten. I guess that set of code doesn't really work quite as well as this one. And then it learns to favor this form of behavior and these behaviors. And eventually it becomes more and more and more and more complex over the course of, like, you know, 40 billion years, or no, sorry, 40 million years or something. Because when we're constantly taking in this data every generation, and even within the generation, there's change and adaptation. So I think
Yeah, and
it's
that's
that.
very similar to like human beings. Like we're programmed in a whole bunch of ways through evolution. Like a
Mhm.
newborn baby straight out its mother, if you submerge it, like, it'll hold its breath before it knows how to open a fist.
Right.
And then when you put something in its palm, it will close its fist without even realizing it has appendages yet, without having
Yeah.
the awareness of what light and taste are.
Well,
Like it
I
suckles and
turn
it
like 10 or
cries
11,
and
start looking at the female of my species. That's not culturally constructed.
right, that's programmed. And like parents caring for their kids and kids loving their parents, and education, like kids are so curious by nature, and you sort of get less curious the older you get, some people. Usually there's a social function to that, like in societies as we evolved over time. You
Yeah.
want the majority of people to be comfortable doing repetitive work after they got good at it, right?
And like, you
That's how
want
they're
that.
most efficient.
Well, and as a guy, I definitely feel some of this stuff, and he's just like, I'm this old, I should go out hunting right now, and you just feel that weird urge, I need to go out into the forest and kill something. It's just like,
Yeah, and a
wait,
lot of
what?
people think machismo is just some social construct, and it's not. It's like part of male biology to want to hide when we're hurt instead of seeking affection from others. And
Yeah.
a lot of the things we do, like get angry when we're sad, whereas a lot of women aren't. I'm not saying all women and all men. I'm just saying, like, on an aggregate average, there
Yeah.
are biological differences, and those are programmed through
And
evolution.
even like, and you could even see how, I guess this, like, Sapolsky in his lecture series on YouTube definitely says this all better than we do, but you can definitely see how even the reining back of some of these, animal urges, even is in itself part of the algorithm. It's just like, I need to not hit these people, even though I
Yeah,
really feel
and
like
our
I want to.
ability to do that is better than chimps,
Right.
and
And
we
so,
superseded them, like
and
evolutionary terms,
and the
because of that.
ones and the ones who are most capable of recognizing and taking that into account and choosing the best option are usually end up being more successful in our societies, on a statistical level.
And we're talking over generations, right?
Right.
It's not like one person does one thing and becomes king that they're forever. Sometimes it works like that with like Genghis Khan or like an English king or something back in the olden times.
Right.
But generally speaking, it's like
we got
it's
lucky
gotta
with
be a
Genghis.
very
Well,
distinct
the
trait
Mongols
for
got
you.
lucky with Genghis Khan, but everyone else got terribly unlucky. But the two rulers after him were absolutely terrible rulers. One of them was a drunk. The other one was just terrible. And then Kublai came along, was like, okay,
I want more.
Well, Kublai was actually a capable ruler. He's still like a bloodthirsty kind of guy, but he was by all rights more effective than Genghis. And but then the Yuan dynasty didn't last far beyond him. It's the same with if he looks like at someone like Marcus Aurelius or
All Roman
Aurelian.
emperors, basically.
Well, there was a couple really good ones,
but they were only relatively good.
Well, no, I mean, like,
they still endorsed war and slavery and, cutting people's limbs off for fun.
Well, some of them were a lot better. And you look at someone like Aurelius, and then you look at his progeny. He was a terrible father. He was a great emperor, but his son Commodus was an absolute, he was a terrible person. He brought a lot of, his father brought a lot of peace and stability to the empire, and then he died, and then his son brought not that.
And see, I think this sort of approach to evolution and like society and culture is an exact perfect reason to believe in not diversity, I should say inclusivity. You want to have an inclusive culture because then it promotes all of the best from all of the gene pools to be the best, not just because they were born there, but because that's what's best for the species. My kids are better off if somebody else who's more intelligent, capable, and competent is running my country.
Yeah,
it's in all of our best interest to promote the best people.
My wife always talks about how diversity strengthens the gene seed of the species because, there's it protects against diseases and certain
all kinds of things.
All kinds of stuff like that. Switching it up every once in a while, that movement of people and that mixing that the early natural philosophers didn't like. That's good for us. We're not going to be inclined to, mixing is the rule. That's also stupid.
Yeah. But and because the aggregation spans generations, like it's not about one person's lifetime and what they are and what they accomplished. Even the lowliest of servants can give birth to a genius. Mm-hmm. That's what we really need to take away from this, is that all those people who believe in like supremacy or, ethnic superiority or whatever, they're all wrong scientifically. Any one of the dumbest person who's the weakest and crippled and feeble, any one of them can have the strongest kid. It's not entirely likely because most people inherit genes from their parents. But if you have two suboptimal genes, we'll say, that cause a disease or a sickness, and together they promote somebody who would otherwise not have gotten that specific combination of genes that made them like particularly brilliant at architecture to build a cathedral. Like the first Gothic cathedral might have been from some layman and a prostitute, for instance. Like where people are in their own specific lives has nothing to do with like spanning generations worth of lotteries and interchanging genes. Like it just doesn't work like that.
It's always a surprise to me how people who have made it, especially like rich kids or something, and how just terrible they are at just generally doing things, or like how they have these weird, just very strange notions. And like you see that in history too, where like the sons of great kings are usually not as good, or sometimes they are. You get like 2 generations after a great king, you get someone who's like, I think I get what my great grandfather was doing. And
But more than genes, it comes down to
but
effort
right,
and heart and intent, like all
right,
those qualitative things about humanity that aren't
right.
teachable.
So all the best people, and this is kind of what made America so effective and what they should
Immigrants.
realize. But yeah, immigrants, but like even the people that showed up and it's like, I got to make something for myself. I'm going to go and do this. There's a need in society and I'm going to fill it just because I can, just because. And then these people who were like, I got a dream and I'm gonna put everything into it, and I'm win or lose, that's what's gonna happen. And they got the opportunity to do it, and all of a sudden, this nation is just the most like effective economy on the planet ever.
And that is the romantic side of colonialization too. Like that's what inspired colonialization, which we know now is like terrible for all of the countries of the world who had to like suffer under it. But that was the idea and thought process that was going through their minds. It's not that they were all evil people looking to exploit other people. They were going there genuinely believing that they were going to do better for not just themselves but their family and their species, and like achieve their potential basically. But that
Right, but I
manifest destiny led to an
right, but that's
aggressive
not
warmongering nation like
right, but that's not
Germany and
really what I'm trying to say. More is that it's I don't really want to compare America to Nazi Germany because historically it doesn't really make.
no,
But
I'm
I'm
saying the
thinking,
abstract of how they got there. It was all from well-intended purposes.
yeah, well, every road to hell is paved with good
Yeah,
intentions, but
but that's how they
the thing,
get there is
yeah,
what I'm
but
getting at.
the thing is that it's this it's that effort from below that that you try twice as hard if you start from behind kind of thing. And you in our society there's generally a it almost puts a premium on you because if you start a little bit behind the pack, you start with a few disadvantages, and you actually work at it, you're probably going to be better off than somebody who was born with a silver spoon in your mouth because their parents probably had it and they worked their way up and then they finally got it. And then you almost have to, like, if you're born in a rich family, you almost have to like kneecap yourself and put yourself in a situation, okay, I'm going to go down there, I'm going to work my butt off down there, and then I'm going to work my way back up myself so I can get to where my parents were and surpass them from down there. Because if I live here in luxury, that impetus is going to not be there. And I think that's part of our programming, and I'm trying to pull this back into programming here.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's part of our algorithm is, and knowing how to, well, self-honesty will let you kind of explore your own code, and you'll end up realizing that, okay, I'm an animal in my environment. Here's how I'm programmed. What does that mean for my course of action soon? Well, it could mean a lot of things. There's no set thing. That's why we have these cryptic tomes from all times to be like, okay, here's what I'm thinking. They all have some element of truth in them, but they're all discovering what is the algorithm and what is the thing that we're plugging this algorithm into.
And the thing that makes like humanity like really special is that we are capable of reprogramming ourselves, unlike computers. No matter what neural net you give a computer, even if you teach it to reprogram itself, it's not able to make itself unable to program itself.
Yeah, my programming
like its core programming
10
it
years
can't
ago
change.
was really a lot less effective than it was today. I don't want to say that's like my IQ is higher, but that's almost, but like the way I interact with my reality now is more efficient than it was before because I gained more experience. I was like, getting this. It's a bummer that my body's not as effective, but that's life.
But you also put in the effort. Like if you didn't try to reprogram yourself, you would have stayed exactly like you were, as infantile as you were as a teenager. You'd still be there. There are tons of people our age who just never grew up.
Oh yeah, I've met so many senior citizens that are pretty much just teenagers.
Yeah. And you know what? That's fine. We need them too. Like this isn't a judgment or a criticism on anybody in their lot in life or what they've accomplished or what they've done. Like success is not even relevant to anybody else but yourself.
Yeah, I think that's almost you just almost made a warning about teleological thinking. There is no end to this, and that's where that the Nazi stuff comes in, where they had this teleological. Everyone has a purpose in the state, and that's foolish. which is why I like living in a free society. Everyone is their own purpose in their life in the country
Yeah.
because they're living their life. We're just giving them a place to live their life. And here's some rules so that, people's lives don't end in their
Yeah. And the
encounters with
people
other
who want
people's
to
lives.
excel, you want to give them leeway to do that. Like you want to lever up the best because they encourage the greater good for all of mankind by extension.
Yeah.
And
So this is good conversation, but I think I want to get back to the computer aspects
yeah, for
of it.
sure.
So that's kind of the biological thing of it. So, but we're talking about programmed neural networks, and how, and I guess what they are. So that's a biological neural network that we live with every day. We have to carry it around. But how is I don't even know if this is the right question, but I think it'll get us going. How is a artificial neural network different from that? How does, because
It's different in the sense that you pre-program its forgetful mechanism. So whereas humans, we forget things just by nature of our brains. So we mentioned it before, while you're sleeping, that's when your memory is most active. It's making connections, reinforcing things that you learned and experienced through the day. That's why you can learn almost anything just by repetition. And that's why practice makes perfect, and training and exercise makes expertise and all that. What's different about a computer, though, is even the algorithm to generate random numbers is an algorithm. The only way to really get truly random numbers would be to set up like a photon detector and check for the spin of an electron because that's the only thing in nature that's really truly random, is the way like certain atoms decay and the rate of their decay. Those are all probabilities that we can't do anything more than just statistically average them out.
you could get someone high and just tell them to say numbers.
Yeah, and our brains work on those same electrons. So it is very literally the physics of the universe that makes our brains different from computers, just fundamentally. However, we can develop quantum computers, and a quantum computer processing a machine learning algorithm could theoretically operate similarly to a brain, but it would still have to be pre-programmed without the evolution behind it, because there would be no way to make one quantum computer algorithm that was like all of humanity, because everybody's different. We all have
Right.
so many variegated genes and so many different upbringings and so many different cultures that we're indoctrinated into. It's just
programmed
impossible.
for our environment. So it's
Yeah,
almost like we ended up happily and more unhappily, depending on how your life's going, like this, based on the inputs we had. And so I guess if you, I remember Ted Nelson was saying something about computing technology could have come from anywhere, but it came from ballistic missile tests. And now we have, Minecraft.
yeah,
So we started calculating. Now at the same time, there's only a certain, there's not an infinite way we construct everything. Certain things are going to work in certain ways, which is why we didn't. It just, the need happened to be like that. So my thought is that we can just hook up one of these types of computers and just get it going on something. And do we know if it'll end up, if there's some certain number of possibilities that'll end up, you get an algorithm, you just put it to work on, I don't know, analyzing books, and it just reads books all day for hundreds and hundreds of years, and eventually it gains an algorithm that's just really good at reading. And it would these programs in the end, coming from different places, end up being very similar? Or, well, I guess we don't even know that. Or
that's sort of the research project I'm building. Is I want to take every neural network that's ever developed and put them into another neural network to figure out what connections they have together.
mm-hmm.
So I want to develop a neural network that processes probabilities of neural networks that are already trained on processing probabilities. But essentially that would only ever do what we've done. It would never supersede us because it needs training data to know anything. So
Right.
it could provide us insight, like things that are really hard to compute, like partial differential equations. Right now, we have to use a whole bunch of approximations and irrational numbers and stuff to calculate them, and use limits and logarithms and a whole bunch of complicated math. A computer could find, like a machine learning algorithm could find optimizations that we haven't found yet. So it would be a very useful tool in progressing math and science. But that's not to say the computer discovered it. It has no idea that it's even useful. It's just spitting numbers out from what it put in. And the major difference between biological synthesis of thought and idea,
slightly effective every single time, more effective.
Sorry, you're cutting out.
Yeah, sorry. It's doing it. Oh, geez.
I got you back.
Am I back?
Yeah, you're back.
Yay. Sorry. Okay, so I think I was saying something like it does it slightly more effective every time it does it, but I don't even.
Yeah, you'd like to think so, but it's not. It's so dumb that it'll do it a really good job, and then it'll get stuck in a local minimum, really good job. You know what I mean? Like, it's woefully inconsistent. Some of the early ones were only 70% effective, and like 30% of the time it didn't produce any result at all.
Yeah, it seems like we underestimate how much data we have to throw at these things in order for them to actually do, put their statistical sets together, and put their interaction with the data together. And at the same time, it seems like something that would run a tic-tac-toe game would be like, it'd be easier, but it'd be a lot simpler as to something that's, say, looking at, I guess, traffic in a major city. Okay, look at all the traffic, see if there's what would be the most effective, and then you just run it through, billions and billions and billions and billions of days, and that's almost probably not enough, because it would need to. Every one is just one data set. Every single one overview of or experiment that it runs through is just one point.
But what the thing has in its favor, though, is that it's looking for patterns, and human beings are extremely pattern conscious.
Mm-hmm.
We look for patterns in everything from like our work schedules to our lovemaking to how we cook, how we eat, how we sleep. We do patterns for literally everything. The way we speak, even how we read, what we draw, like what we listen to.
It's funny how well we remember things that rhyme, and like oral histories. If you look at some of the old stories humans used to tell each other, and making them rhyme, giving them a beat, giving them a song, and it was a mnemonic device. It's just, this is how we work. And if you want to pass a story down, you make it rhyme.
And there's drums in every single music culture around the world. Yeah. Independently, they develop drums. But the neat thing about all that is that the computer looks for patterns, though, in a neural network. That's essentially what it's doing when it's charting graphs and paths through all the different branches. It's looking for patterns and sequences. It's not looking for ones and zeros. And it's by figuring that out, and by having the development of GPUs, like graphical processing units, that develop from games and movies and CG animation for everything we do, like artistically online and all entertainment, basically. They even use it in audio production and stuff now. That stuff is just pattern recognizers, and that's essentially how our brains work too, and that's why we call them neural nets. But the crucial fundamental difference is we're engineering the forgetting process into a computer, and nature does it for us by just quantum mechanics, like unfathomable uncertainty.
Okay, I think I'm getting this now. So, and that's pretty much, I think you said it way better than I was trying to there when I was saying, like, you need to feed it more data and like tons of data, because I think the idea of a pattern is exactly what I was trying to feebly say there, because you give it one data point and it's like, okay, this is a failure, but you give it 30 data points and, now you have a couple ones and zeros, yeses and nos and failures or non-failures. But then you give it 30 billion of those, and it can start to look and see what happens over and over again, where things work, where things don't, where things slightly work. And you can put tons of models together, and then you give it another 30 trillion of those, and you can, the further out you go, the better resolution on the patterns you'll get, and you might even see larger patterns.
And like
So
everything from even our biology, like how our veins grow as our limbs and stuff grow, they branch off in patterns, right? Like how our hair follicles grow and how our gait works, and how the symmetry of the human body is based on a pattern on one side, not knowing anything about the other side, but growing at the exact same rate.
our
Right?
eyeballs,
Yeah.
the distribution of hair in our nose.
Yeah, yeah. And it's really neat. Like you might get like a mole on one side, not on the other, and you might be like partly bald over here, but not over here. Like there are inconsistencies because they're diametrically split. Like there's a bifurcation from birth that it just never has a chance to communicate with the other side again.
But even that
But the
symmetry in
pattern is so
itself is a
strong.
pattern that we look for. Like we look for symmetry in mates. And
Yeah.
sometimes like there was a question on I think it was Brett Weinstein's podcast, and someone asked him about like if we look like to look at symmetry, why do we always part our hair on the side? And they're like, well, it's because lack of symmetry in your hair. They came up with the answer: the lack of symmetry in your hair points to the symmetry of the face, and so you get like beauty marks. I think I've got one around here somewhere, and which show up in people like oh, look, like I like that little spot in their face, and even that is a pattern that we look for.
Yeah, and it's an evolved program too, like you said before.
And so I think evolution rather than thought because thought is, when we say it like this, thought is almost and consciousness is almost a small resolution thing compared to what we're talking about. Because when you're programming something like this, it's more like the evolution of an entire species than it is the individual's experience.
And where thought comes into play, the only reason why I'd give thought a bigger scope is because without thought, all these neural networks and stuff couldn't possibly exist. Even if they existed, they wouldn't technically exist. You know what I mean? If nobody's there to perceive it, it might as well just be not our universe, in which case it would not be something in our universe, in which case it would not be existent.
Yeah, hopefully there's some aliens watching going, oh man, are they going to make that already? Finish it so we can come and get it.